Welcome to Christian Warrior Training. My name is Keith. This is my weekly news broadcast where I talk about all the crime that occurred throughout the United States at churches. We've got a fatal shooting in Florida at a parking lot in a church. We've got some other gunplay occurring at other churches around the United States. Lots of sexual assault. We've got a really bad situation in Mexico where some cartel members murdered 7 young children at a church in Mexico. And we do talk about some international stories. But before we begin, I'm going to start talking about our terror update, and I'm going to talk more about what's going on with terrorism in the United States. It seems like every week something new is coming out, so I'm just going to start including that in the weekly crime bulletin. You can head over to christianwarriortraining.com and you can sign up for this newsletter. I send it out every Saturday, and you'll get all the current updates of all the crime that occurs. And we just don't tell you about the crime, but we also talk about what you can do as a church or as a person to protect yourself, protect your church, protect your congregation, and to keep something like this from happening in the first place. Let's start with the first terror update. Islamic State put out some new propaganda that targets Christians and crusader nations and global calls to violence. Now, between May 9th and the 16th, the Islamic State amplified their propaganda, explicitly encouraging violence against Christian individuals and institutions, referring to Western countries as crusaders and calling for global retaliation tied to the ongoing Israel-Gaza conflict. Now, this has been almost weekly that ISIS has been putting out information to attack Christians. They are targeting the lone wolves in your community in the hopes that they will connect with them so that they can attack your church. That's your greatest threat right now. Now, a notable propaganda release by IS-aligned Al-Batar Media was titled "Revenge for Our Muslim Brothers in Gaza" and depicted rocket launchers near an IS flag and called for attacks against Jews, Christians, and allied governments. Now, the imagery and the messaging framed Christians collectively as enemies, urging supporters to strike Christian-associated institutions as part of IS's broader religious war narrative. Now, if you head over to christianwarriortraining.com, sign up for the newsletter, you will see the actual imagery that they put up for everybody to see. The next one, the Islamic State put out more propaganda that threatened U.S. and Christian-identified nations. And it was titled, "So Die in Your Rage, America." Look, it was just more propaganda calling for these lone wolves to come out and attack us. I just want you to be aware of it because they just need to connect with one person. Moving on to Washington, D.C., where we had 2 Israeli embassy staff fatally shot outside a D.C. Jewish museum. The suspect was charged with murder. Now, in this particular case, those 2 staffers were actually Messianic Jews, and they attended a church locally in the area to D.C. Now, in this case, a 31-year-old man was charged with first-degree murder after allegedly shooting and killing 2 Israeli embassy employees outside the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. on the 21st. Now, the victims were both young professionals, were leaving an event hosted by the American Jewish Committee when the suspect reportedly opened fire and he shouted pro-Palestinian slogans. Now, it is being investigated as an act of terrorism. You can see the suspect there in the video. This is who IS is trying to connect with, is weak-minded people like this guy to make them go out and do acts of violence. It easily could have been your church, your synagogue, or somebody else. So look, you can't let yourself slip. I have a great article over at christianwarriortraining.com. Let me pull it up for you. I've got this great article, 7 Steps for Mastering Situational Awareness. And I go into everything you need to know about situational awareness and how to not get shot, basically, right? So head on over there. It's super easy. I'm probably going to turn this into a class, but head on over there. I think it'll help you not be a victim for an easy lone wolf suspect. All right, next up, we're going to go to Florida, where a woman was fatally shot in a Lauderhill Church parking lot. The gunman was still at large. I think he might have been caught, but I'm not positive. I thought I heard somewhere that he had been caught. But I can't find that story after I heard that. Now, look, a woman was shot and killed in the early morning hours of May 18th in the parking lot of a church located in Northwest 38th Avenue in Lauderhill, Florida. The victim is a 41-year-old woman visiting from Bradenton for a birthday party. She was pronounced dead at the scene after a gunman reportedly approached and opened fire, discharging about 28 rounds. A second woman also was shot but survived and has since been released from the hospital. The shooting left visible damage to church windows and nearby structures, and it occurred in the vicinity of the church property, but not during a worship service. Now, look, most violent crime at churches happen in the parking lot, like here, and not during a worship service. Now, look, I just released information just a couple days ago about statistics of violent crime at churches for the last year. And a clear 2/3 of all cases occurred outside of the sanctuary, meaning like in the parking lot, but still on church property somewhere. And another clear majority happened off hours, not during a worship service. So I just want you to keep this in mind. While your staff work odd hours, many people that are fleeing danger are going to go to a nearby church, whether they have a connection to that church or not, to find sanctuary. It seems almost every week somebody gets shot in a church parking lot because they were fleeing danger. They were fleeing the person that was trying to kill them. Now, what happens if you're a pastor and you're working late at night and that's when it happens while you're there? You need to make sure you pay attention and keep your head on a swivel. It's also important to note right now, it's important to have a 4K video system in addition to a burglar and a fire alarm at your church. Now, these are the most basic security functions any church can have: that fire alarm, burglar alarm, and a 4K video system. So here, it would have helped identify a shooter and help prosecute that person when it comes time to go to court. Next up, we got a man that was arrested for threatening and disrupting a Gallatin church service. Now, a man from Rayville, Missouri was arrested on May 18th for allegedly disrupting a service at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Gallatin and threatening its congregants. Now, according to law enforcement, the incident began when the man was asked to remove his hat, prompting an aggressive outburst in which he demanded the sacrament and later insisted on being baptized by 2 missionaries. The suspect reportedly shouted profanities and threatened to shoot church members in the parking lot. Now, he was apprehended during a traffic stop and continued making erratic statements, including claiming to be the prophet Joseph Smith. He now faces charges of second-degree terrorist threat, disrupting a house of worship, and peace disturbance. The suspects being held without bond at the regional jail. Now, look, I want to take this point to tell you that if someone tells you that they're going to shoot you, take their word for it. Don't try to dismiss the threats, because that is totally foolish. A lot of people oftentimes will try to minimize somebody making a threat like that. If somebody says they're going to shoot you, immediately remove them from the church and get them out of there. When you're removing them, ask them if they have a gun on them, and then you're going to have to decide what to do. But you have to act decisively, okay? If they say, I'm going to shoot you, that's a direct threat. And I can tell you many times during SWAT operations, I would be in a command post, and I remember having to, on one particular incident, the man was starting to kill his family. And I remember everybody was trying to dismiss it, and I'm like, everybody stop just for a minute. He said he's going to kill his family. We're taking his word at it. And we're going to drive all of our tactics towards that. There's no reason that we should be dismissing any kind of a threat like that. Just my 2 cents. I'm not telling you to pull out a gun and shoot the man, because you definitely don't have a deadly force incident yet. If he produces a firearm, then you most certainly would, but you don't have one yet. But you're going to have to act decisively. And here's the thing: is you have to do training at your church routinely, where you do scenario training like this. Like, somebody comes in, disrupts it. How are you going to deal with it? How are you going to remove them? At what point do you remove them? You've got to run through all of these scenarios to figure out what you're going to do. And most importantly, so that everybody in your church, your pastor, the safety team, the greeters, the worship team, doesn't matter who, everybody is on the same page. Okay, next up, we got a guy that assaulted a parishioner at St. Michael's Church in Cannon City, Colorado. Now, a 25-year-old man's been arrested in connection with an early morning assault at St. Michael's Church in Cannon City. The incident occurred on May 3rd when police responded around 3 a.m. to report of a suspicious person on church grounds. On arrival, officers found a 51-year-old man who reported being assaulted and was transported to a hospital for treatment. Following an investigation that included review of surveillance footage, authorities identified the suspect and obtained a warrant for his arrest. He was taken into custody on May 19th and is facing charges including second-degree assault, menacing, and possession of an illegal weapon. Here is a good win for a church with a video system. So do you see why you need one now? Do you see why I keep bringing it up? Here, we got a good cop that watched the video and said, I know who that guy is. And they were immediately able to apprehend him and get him into custody, so you don't have to worry about him coming back or doing other things. That 4K video system is one of the basic things that you can do for security at your church, along with that alarm. Next up, we got a man that was taken into custody after brandishing a gun at an Oklahoma City church. This happened on May 21st after he allegedly pulled a gun and threatened individuals at the church located on Southwest 26th Street. and Chartel Avenue in Oklahoma City. According to police, the suspect fled the scene by vehicle and was apprehended about a block away. Authorities stated that a man was taken to a nearby hospital for evaluation as they investigate whether he was under the influence of drugs or if he had a mental illness. Now, look, it's up to you, but it is clearly self-defense if a person pulls a gun on you. You're already behind the curve when he pulls that gun. Reaction time is a second and a half, and a lot can happen in that time. So you want to get off the X. Now, getting off the X means, like, if you pull a gun on me right here, I'm on the X. I need to get off the X. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move out of the way. I'm just going to move, pull my gun. I tell you, I'm going to return fire. I need to stop them immediately. The minute that gun starts coming out, there's two choices you have. Grab the gun and try to do a takeaway, which I have trained for, and that's probably going to be my go-to because it's going to be quicker for me to disarm them than it is to try and pull my gun and avoid getting shot. But if you don't train for that and you decide to get off that X, sidestep, if you go over to ChristianWarriorTraining.com, I have a firearms course of fire. Go to the training tab, and then I've got one on a firearms course of fire, a qualification standard for churches. And in that qualification standard, part of that is moving to the right, moving to the left, and while you draw and fire. And part of that is we're instilling in you that you need to move and fire and get out of the way. My whole point to this is this man pulled a gun in a church. It's going to be very difficult for you to pull your gun and shoot him. I'm not telling you to do that, but certainly you would be justified in a similar situation. Now, clearly, God was watching out for everybody and saved everybody, but it's going to be a difficult decision, and you better start role-playing in your church for incidents just like this. Now, look, the chances of something like this happening at your church are very minimal, but it's not zero. And as long as it's not zero, you should train for it. Now, you're more likely going to have a medical incident. You're more likely going to have a sexual assault. You're more likely to have property crime. But that doesn't mean that you don't train for this eventuality. You should train for all of them. Next up, we got a guy that forced entry into a Georgia church and locked a mother and a child in an office at that church. Now, a man was arrested and charged after allegedly forcing his way into Bridgepoint Church in Marietta, Georgia, on May 8th and locking a mother and a child in an office. According to police, the suspect initially attempted to break in through a side door, and when that failed, he rang the doorbell. When the woman opened the door slightly, the man allegedly shoved his way inside, causing her to fall. Now look, if somebody rings the doorbell and you get an eerie feeling about it, simply talk to them through the door, okay? Or ignore them. He then reportedly confined both the woman and her child in an office by using his body to barricade the door. A church member intervened and restrained the suspect until police arrived. Authorities have charged him with burglary, false imprisonment, and cruelty to a child. The incident has left members of the community shaken, particularly given the church's reputation for openness and community outreach. All right, next up, we're going to talk about sexual assaults. Look, I get demonetized on all of these. If you want to help my mission in what I'm doing here to bring attention to you, all the crimes that are occurring in churches across the U.S., you want to learn about what you can do to prevent that, head over to ChristianWarriorTraining.com. The paid subscription helps me run everything here at Christian Warrior Training. You don't have to. Don't worry about it if you can't. It's all good. God will find a way to continue what I'm doing here. Not really worried about it, but if you want to help, that's one way to help. All right, now we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about this Faith Life Church incident. Now, a former official at Faith Life Church in New Albany, Ohio, has been indicted on 5 additional sex crime charges involving minors, bringing the total to 32 counts. The accused is age 36, previously held the position of chief media officer at the church, and is the son of the church's co-pastors. The new charges filed in Knox County Common Pleas Court included 2 counts of rape and 3 counts of gross sexual imposition, allegedly committed between 2008 and 2012 against a child under the age of 13. Authorities noted that none of the alleged crimes took place on church property. The defendant has pleaded not guilty to all charges and remains held on a $2 million bond ahead of a jury trial scheduled for July 1st. Now, look, oftentimes trusted officials in a church, like the pastor and their family, are not subjected to background checks, or they are not monitored when they're alone with children. The rules apply to everybody. You have a new pastor that's coming in, background check him. Is he ever to be alone with children? No, nobody is. This is just the way it is. I like to look at scripture and help it guide me in the things that I do for church. And for here, we're going to go to 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 21. In the presence of God and of Christ Jesus and of the elect angels, I charge you to keep these rules without prejudging, doing nothing from partiality. This verse, for me, underscores the importance of applying standards and safeguards impartially without favoritism, even toward those in positions of authority. Just my 2 cents. I don't know if that's what happened here. They said it happened off church grounds, but just my 2 cents that I want to throw in there on something that I see happening at churches all around the country. Next up, Ray of Hope Church van driver in Taylor, Pennsylvania was charged with sexual abuse of a vulnerable teen. Now, a former church van driver and youth volunteer for Ray of Hope Church has been charged with multiple felony offenses related to the alleged long-term abuse of a vulnerable teenager. According to authorities, the incidents took place between July 2021 and July 23 and occurred both in the church van and on church property. The investigation began after a report was filed through a national cyber tip line in April of 25. The victim, a teenager with documented developmental disabilities, reported multiple instances of coercive conduct during church-related activities. The suspect reportedly admitted to some of the allegations during an interview with investigators. Now look, not even a van driver should be left alone with children. Any adult, regardless of position, should never be alone with a child, ever. I know it's inconvenient for you. I know it's a pain, but we have a huge problem in the body of Christ that we are not addressing. Each week, you'll see more sex crimes than violent crime. I need you to wake up and I need you to help solve the problem. And I know some of you are like, I am taking care of the problem. I'm talking to those of you that make exceptions when, or don't have a policy at all. You should have a policy about interaction with children, and you should adhere to that policy no matter what. And in that policy, there are no exceptions. All right, now we're going to move on to traffic collisions. Here we got a bus that crashed into a Richfield Lutheran Church playground, injuring 2 children. I'm having to include collisions now in our weekly summary because there's some things I need you to do. First, let's talk about what happened. On May 19th, a school bus veered off the road and crashed into the playground of Richfield Lutheran Church in Minneapolis, injuring 2 children. The incident occurred around 4 p.m. near West 60th and Nicollet Avenue. Police say the bus was traveling westbound when it left the roadway and collided with the playground area, which is located near the church's parking lot. At the time, 3 children were playing. 2 were taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. 2 children aboard the bus and a 3rd child in the playground were not seriously harmed and were released to their parents. Last week in my news broadcast, I talked about the growing number of traffic collisions injuring children. I also talked about how vehicle ramming attacks are becoming the go-to mass murder tool. So we need to protect our children. Like, we can all agree on that. Now, as I pass by churches around the country, almost every playground or children's area can be breached by a large vehicle. Now, there's one very close to me. I live next to a U.S. highway. There is a large church preschool near there, a large school near there. There are probably 300 kids in that school, and I see them playing on the playground, and I could easily take my truck, ram it through the cyclone fence, and run over all the children. That's intentionally. What about the accidents that occur too? Traffic is 55 miles an hour on that roadway. It is poor planning on putting the playground there. There are things that you can do to protect those children by putting up bollards, and a lot of churches are afraid to put those in. I don't know why. There was one church in Slidell, Louisiana that I taught at. I was so happy with them. If you guys are watching, I love you guys. When I came out, they're like, look what we just installed. And it was 2 bollards that were not fairly attractive, but they put it there knowing that somebody could have driven a vehicle right through their lobby and killed everybody in there. And they took proactive steps. If they didn't point it out to me, I wouldn't have paid attention to it. I wouldn't have noticed, oh, they just put these bollards in, or it's just something normal that we see every day. So whether it's an accident or it's intentional, we need to protect our children's areas. Now, some churches spend an inordinate amount of time at the range or practicing for an active shooter when it's more likely they're going to lose their children to a motor vehicle or to sexual assault. I'm not saying don't go to the range. I'm not saying don't go and practice for an active shooter. You certainly should be doing those things. But I will see people not lift a finger to protect the children from a vehicle, and I won't see them lift a finger to stop sexual assault because it won't happen here. Now, they believe an active shooter will happen there, but they don't believe sexual assault will happen there. I don't get that part. You have to believe that the devil is continuously trying to get in and harm your people. And your job is to keep the devil out. How good of a job are you doing? Not any kind of accusatory thing there, just asking the question. That's it. All right, now we're going to move on to arsons and fires. A man was arrested for arson after multiple fires at Brighter Day Ministry Church in West Virginia. Look, I covered this story last week in the news broadcast. It's just an update to let you know that the guy that started all those fires, he was arrested. So during an interview with law enforcement, the suspect admitted setting the fires, providing a detailed account of his movements between the incidents. He's being held on a $20,000 bond, which is not nearly enough, but at least they caught him. There was also a fire at the historic Claiborne Temple in Memphis. It was ruled intentional. Now, the fire department confirmed on May 22nd that it was intentional. The church is a landmark of the civil rights movement and the former headquarters of the 1968 sanitation workers strike that drew Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to Memphis. It was undergoing a $25 million restoration project when the blaze broke out in the early hours of April 28th. Now, I reported on this a couple weeks ago in the newscast, and I changed this from arson/fires because it usually takes a while to show that it's arson. And so I want to put the fire in there just so that way if it's in your area, you can be aware of it and just keep an eye on it. Now, officials said the fire originated inside the church and destroyed much of the interior, though some of the exterior may be salvageable. It was built in 1892 and listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Now, Claiborne Temple had served as a vital organizing center for civil rights activism and housed the original printing of the I Am a Man posters. We're going to move on to the San Francisco Bay Area, where two teens were arrested for burglary and vandalism at Santa Rosa Bible Church. The incident occurred on May 18th when the teens allegedly entered the church through an unsecured door and proceeded to damage property, including breaking a toilet, defecating on the bathroom floor, urinating in the gymnasium, and damaging a children's outdoor play structure. This is the second week in a row we've had somebody defecating in a church. This seems to be kind of a common thing that's coming up lately. I know the Catholics have had a lot of incidents, or not a lot of, but a few incidents in the last few months of people urinating in the holy water. I don't understand it. All of you with a psychology degree, go into the comments and tell me what is up with all the people pooping on the church. I don't get it. It's gross. Seriously though, if you're a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist and you know what the deal is with the whole pooping on the floor thing, I'd love to hear it. I'm just interested more than anything to know. All right, now we're going to move down to Mexico, where 7 youths were killed in a cartel shooting at a Catholic church festivity in Mexico. Now, a violent attack at a Catholic church organized festivity in San Bartolo de Barrios in Guanajuato, Mexico. I apologize for murdering these names in Spanish. I used to speak Spanish fairly well, and I left California, and now I've lost it all, so I apologize. Now, this incident left 7 youths dead, including 2 minors, after the gunman opened fire in the village's central square in the early hours of May 20th. The victims had remained after the parish event when the armed assailants arrived and indiscriminately fired approximately 100 rounds. Authorities suspect the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel is behind the attack, as threatening messages linked to the cartel were found nearby. All right, now look, I'm very familiar with Mexican cartels. Many of you know that I was a former narcotics detective, and for a few years before I started Christian Warrior, I had a newsletter dedicated to intelligence dealing with the Mexican cartels. You can go over and check that out. It's the drugintelligencebulletin.com, and you can read some of my past bulletins on the cartel activity. Now, my contacts in Mexico tell me that even the government is admitting that they have lost control over large swaths of Mexico. So if you're doing mission work in Mexico, understand that the cartels have started assassinating Christians. Now, traditionally, they had left Christians alone, but they recently killed a priest, and I've noticed more Christians at Christian events are being murdered. That is not something we've ever seen before. You also have to be aware that drone warfare and vehicular-borne IEDs or VBEDs are a common sight in the threat landscape in Mexico. I'm just bringing this up to your attention. If I would not recommend going to Mexico on vacation. A lot of you still are doing that. They're kidnapping regular people like you for ransom, and if they don't get to pay the ransom, they're killing you. That is a normal thing in Mexico right now. And I don't think people understand. They go, but the area I go to is safe. It's owned by whatever. No, they're running gun battles in tourist hotels now. With that said, if you're going there as a missionary, register with the State Department, and make sure that you have safe houses available to you in Mexico that you can go to if something were to happen. They are killing Christians. And I just want you to be aware. I don't want you to stop your mission work because that's important. Go do that. But just don't think you're going on a mission to Mexico like it's no big deal. It is a very huge deal, and you have to protect yourself. I'm writing a very long document for missionaries about how to protect yourself when you go on mission work. And it's based loosely off of the Air Force's SEER School, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. It's kind of like a SEER manual for missionaries. And I know missionaries don't traditionally think about these things. I do. I think about this stuff constantly. I went to New Zealand a couple of weeks ago. And even when I was there, I had a plan if something were to happen, and I did have safe houses that I could go to, but I still had a plan in case something happened because you never know, no matter where you are. All right, next up, we're headed to Nigeria like we do every week because they are slaughtering Christians in Nigeria. In fact, I do believe Nigeria is the #1 place in the world where Christians are being persecuted. Now, gunmen suspected to be members of the Lakurawa terrorist group attacked a church in Zagami village located in the Danko Wasugu local government area of Kebbi State, Nigeria on May 18th. Now, according to local officials, armed assailants stormed the church during worship and abducted approximately 10 individuals, mostly women, while also injuring several others. The church lies near the border with Zamfara State, an area increasingly targeted by armed groups. Now, local leaders cite Kebbi's perceived vulnerability, allegedly due to reduced military presence and ongoing security challenges, as a factor in the rising attacks. This latest incident follows a deadly assault in the same region just one day earlier, in which 15 farmers were killed. Now, authorities are coordinating efforts for troop deployment to reinforce security in border communities. Now, look, the Nigerians kicked out American Special Forces and some other military assets out of the country. The government in Nigeria is losing control to these Islamic militants, and the Islamic militants are murdering Christians in churches every week in the tens, at least. So I think now is the time to show our support for all of our Nigerian brothers and sisters. Whatever you can do to help them. If you know of a good charity doing good work in Nigeria to protecting Christians and spreading the word of Christ in Nigeria, leave a link in the comments and let us know. It would be nice to know what's going on for Nigerians there. All right, when we leave here, I'd like you to pray for the safety of all of our churches and Christians everywhere, for their safety and their protection. And I want us to pray for all of our missionaries that are out there spreading the word of Christ. They are doing a wonderful job, and we need to pray for their safety. The other thing I want you to remember is your ABCs: always be caring.